You ready, Patrick? Woo!
Okay, we're all ready.
Okay. Hello, I'm Carol Byerly, and I was lucky enough to be married to Rad Byerly for 30 years. And so we are delighted to be able to have this grant named in his honor. Before we start, I've been asked to read this, and it says, I acknowledge that the University of Colorado Boulder sits upon land within the territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. Further, I acknowledge that 48 contemporary tribal nations are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. Thank you. I also want to make a political statement, and that is that I feel that we are at the center here of a heartbeat that still believes in science and serious public policy. And who would think that we would be here? But I am so gratified, and I know that Rad would have been gratified as well. Rad had a great career, and a lot of you didn't know him, but he was fun, but he also had a great career. And his last job was to be at this center. I had an office upstairs, and he saw talking to graduate students and was his most important job. And what his job was to get their eyes out of the clouds and the heads out of the clouds and talk about the realities of public policy and how it's very complicated and messy and human. But that was his last job. And so this award is wonderful. Patrick, this is exactly the kind of work that I know we are happy to support. Environmental studies, education, and you're going to put together something that other communities can use. What a good idea. Why do we need to recreate the wheel? We have family in Oregon, and we were there long enough to watch the starfish die. And that is amazing that can happen so quickly. And then I was at Galveston last year, and the plastic on the shore again was horrifying, and the ships out there. So this is bigger than I thought I would ever see. And so thank you to the center. Thank you to you, Patrick, for working on this and looking at it from the policy point of view, but also education, because that's what we need to do. So I look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to try and accomplish a decent amount in this short 40 minutes or so that I have. I'd like to first start off looking at the reasons behind science-art integration and take you through that from my own point of view and my own story before expanding it out a bit. Then I'd like to move at looking art-science integration as a tool for awareness, the benefits of that and the limitations, and finally moving towards looking at it as a way to motivate action and a way to create change. So with those lofty goals in mind, I am going to start with a bit of my own background and that path to art-science integration from my own point of view. I've been in environmental education for only about 15 years now. It's been an incredible journey. I've had the pleasure to work in many different places in New Mexico, and Minnesota, and Alaska, and Oregon. But that move up to Alaska really was a pivot point in my life. It was the first time that I lived on the coastline, and it just was absolutely incredible. Where I ended up in South Central Alaska teaching intertidal ecology and marine biology is in Homer at the Center for Alaskan Coastal Studies. We had a 30-foot tidal range. So when that tide dropped, it went down 30 vertical feet. And you could walk into a beach that felt like you ought to be diving there with octopus and sea stars and just incredible marine life. And with a dedicated group of fourth graders, we could find 120 species down on the beach, just checking things out. This is one of my personal favorites. It's a 12-foot ribbon worm that we pulled out from under a rock and stretched between about half a dozen kids there. It was a pretty awesome find. The entire ecosystem brought me so much joy. These huge sunflower stars, again, like if you take one of these guys, they get up to about 2.5, 3 feet at their biggest. And if you take one and plop it upside down in a fourth grader's arms, it is a magical experience. After a couple seasons working in that realm, I was asked to take over as the International Coastal Cleanup Coordinator for the state of Alaska, working with the Ocean Conservancy. And that meant that I was in charge of providing the resources, education, and data collection for any community in Alaska who wanted to do a community cleanup. It took me to some incredible places, cities and tiny villages, and we found a lot of trash in most of them. But I realized pretty quickly this was a small part of the story in Alaska. Most places people live are places where the most extreme weather and issues don't exist. And that seems like it should be that way. But the places that collect a huge amount of marine debris are remote beaches. And I started going out on these trips for 2 weeks to 2 months on boats that we would anchor off the coastline of remote islands and distant beaches and just hunker down and pick things up for days and days and days and days. And there are some beaches that we worked on where every year, every half mile, we pick up 5,000 to 10,000 pounds. They were set up so they were just little hooks that reached out in the current, grabbed everything that went by. And as I was working on this and picking up this debris and in the community cleanups and the bigger cleanups, I started to jump into the research side of it. And I could show you page after page of depressing studies that are looking at turtles and seabirds and large marine mammals. But the one that actually really got to me was this one that came out just a few years ago in 2015, that plastics have entered the base of the ocean food chain. We're starting to see zooplankton eating plastic. And that means that this conversation about, well, which species in the ocean are affected and are not affected by our pollution, that's not the right conversation anymore. Because every species is or will be directly or indirectly affected by our plastic pollution. Every ocean on Earth, every place they have surveyed, they have found plastic. From the cleanup side of it, one of the most heartbreaking things is when you rolled up to a beach that looked like this, you knew you could pick up a lot of this stuff, but when you looked closely, it looked like that. And you can see the bottle caps for scale. And it was absolutely impossible to pick up all the plastic, even from single beaches. I realized after a couple of years of this that I was in this cycle in which I would go out and do cleanups, bring all that stuff in, collect the data, report the data, go to the conferences to tell the same group I told the year before about the data in order to get a little more funding to do the same thing next year. And it just broke my heart when I finally settled in to the reality of this issue. After I moved down to Colorado and have kept up with the studies, it's important to note we're not immune from it here. I don't know if anybody noticed that study about microplastics in the rain in Rocky Mountain National Park. Plastics have been found in our tap water, bottled water, groundwater, soil, food, air, us. All of us contain some amount of plastic debris right now, because it is contained in all of these other things that we surround ourselves with. This study kind of brought it together for me. I just got to read it last year. But it was looking at this picture in a global ethics standpoint of the way humans tend to say, humans, other. And we all do that, I think, on a personal scale. We say, my world, this is my safe place, this is where things can't touch me, this is my bubble. And these huge global environmental issues, when you settle into them, when you let yourself look at the picture they create, burst that bubble. And one way to put it that I've thought a lot about it is anything we make a hell of a lot of, anything, we're going to eat, drink, and breathe it. Because we're in a closed system. The only bubble that we actually exist in is the one that surrounds our Earth. And man, when you settle into that reality, it's a hell of a thing. When I look at climate data right now, this is Yo Climate Maps from 2018. I see a lot of parallels between marine debris and climate issues. And if I were to scroll up on this, which I can't because it's a slide, but it would show you that about 70% of people say they believe in climate change according to Yo Climate Maps. I saw a survey a couple weeks ago from PBS that said that's up to 80. But both of those surveys still said about 40% of people don't think it'll affect them personally. And to me, that difference, that roughly half of people who say, yep, that's a problem over there, that's the epitome of the people who have had that bubble popped and those who have not. Because when you sit in that space of, oh my God, plastic's inside me, it's inside every environment. I breathe in the impacts of climate change every breath I take. I sit in that space of a closed system. I'm part of it, it's part of me. When you get there, you can't say, climate change, me. Or plastic pollution, me. That wall breaks down. What I think is interesting is that we, as adults, often have trouble doing this in a way that the youth do not. Once, I think, students learn and settle into this idea of global environmental issues, they get it. They get that they're part of it, and it's part of them. And it's part of the world that they're in now and the one that will be. And hammering that home, I don't know how many people saw Greta's speech here to the UN, but of all the speeches she's given,
It's not coming up.
that's okay, I'll duplicate it, thank you. I thought that it was one of the most powerful because it showed that raw emotion. It showed that deep understanding. I can't other the issue, and I don't believe that you should either. So I want to watch just about a minute of this, with the understanding that this is where a lot of students are. This is what a lot of young people are feeling, and it's what a lot of us are feeling that have fully settled into the reality of these issues as well.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams, my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
To me, that's the epitome of sitting in that space and recognizing these issues all around us. They're in us. We're part of them. They're part of us. And we just cannot ignore that anymore and move forward. So for me, in that place of heartbreak, of anger, of understanding, the toughest part about that place is it is really hard to be there and say, I need to move forward, I need to act, I need to feel empowered, I need to create solutions. Because that space just hits you so hard. And I actually think it's a good place to start, because when you stop othering environmental issues, you can start to do the work. So for me, what helped shift that space was getting involved with the arts. If we take these problems and we look at them from just the science, just the data, climate change, global warming, ocean acidification, choose your issue. If you look up the recent reports on any of those, it is not hopeful. It's getting worse, and it's heavy as hell to read those and hold that. And I think because of that, we need to recognize that that cognitive, analytical research perspective is only one perspective. And it's an important one. We need to know that. We need to recognize the state of things to be able to make decisions about what to do next. But if you stay there, you can't act, because you can't act without hope. And so for me, the arts took me to this place where, by getting involved in a place that was not motivated by purely the research and the data, I was able to connect the head and the heart in that space and look at the way the arts impacted the creative, intuitive, visionary spaces that we can also hold. Recognize that through our choices, our actions, our decisions, our creativity, our ingenuity, our love, we will recreate this world in the next decade, 2 decades, 50 years. We will recreate this world, and it will be unrecognizable to us now. But to open that space of possibility, I think you have to connect not just the data and the research, but the heart, the emotion, the creativity. So, after working in Alaska for a number of years, I transitioned to working as the education director for this project called the Wash to Shore Project that picked up plastic pollution on the beaches through volunteer cleanups, gathered that, sorted it, cleaned it, and transformed it into these sculptures in community workshops. And at the moment, the project has about 80 sculptures that moved to zoos and aquariums and museums throughout the country. We even made a stop in Denver a few years ago. This was my my informal introduction to Beth. She met Octavia, and through Octavia, we got to meet and have a cup of tea, and that set me quite a ways on this path forward. But using the arts to combine with these issues not only changes how you approach them and enables that head and heart combination, but it also enables you to walk through communication barriers that wouldn't have been possible before. If I stood up right now in front of Union Station and said, "Let me tell you about plastic pollution, come on over, let me tell you about how screwed the oceans are, let's talk," a lot of people would go. But by putting this sculpture up in that space, people came and they asked about the issue. Didn't have to tell them. They go, "What is this? Oh, where's it from? What does it mean?" It opens up a space for communication that also doesn't say, "I want to talk to you about environmental issues." It opens up a space of, look at this amazing thing we can create and consider what it means. And that enables people who might not be inclined to have these conversations to do so. It's an incredibly powerful tool. And I think really well done art, inherent in the art itself, we can see the issues and we can see the solution. Because in these sculptures, we included pieces that you could recognize from everyday life, but by virtue of being there, of having these sculptures in existence, it also showed, whoa, humans can do incredible things. We can figure this out. And we toured the country for a few years. The exhibit is still doing so. But I got to a place where I saw a couple things. One of them was a whole lot of this, which is not nothing. But people were coming into the exhibits, reading the signs, looking at the sculpture, going, read sign, look at sculpture, walk out. And I could see that what we had done is create an awareness of the issue. People got it. There was no question about that. The project raised awareness in really important ways. But I began to question whether that was enough, but also if it was even the right way to go about it, if it even had a negative impact in some regards. Because I see us doing this with climate a lot too. We raise awareness. We're good at it. We've had a lot of practice. And then, for those people who become aware, especially if they're students, we say, hey, here's this huge amount of weight. I'm going to put it on your shoulders. You're welcome. Good luck. And for what? By just raising awareness, all we've done is put that weight on their shoulders. All we've done is say, boy, hope you can figure this one out. Go, get it done. And that, I don't think, is useful. Especially in a time when action is so necessary. This is also not to say awareness is never a useful thing. But I think awareness alone has its limits. It also has its place. But the things we were telling people to do are, hey, reduce using your water bottles. Use reusable bags. Are those good things to do? Yes. Are they going to get it done? Absolutely not. And people realize that pretty quickly if they're using their reusable water bottle week after week after week after week after week after week. They start to go, what is this doing? And so not only do I think we need to move towards action, I think it has to be collective action and a space in which people can find themselves moving forward with a group to support them in that role. So it's not a bad thing to say we should use less water bottles, but it's not empowering if that means, hey, I'd like you to use less water bottles. It becomes empowering if I say we've got an exhibit. We want 100,000 people not to use water bottles for a week. We would like you to talk about how that works for you. What are your challenges? What impacts does that have on your life? So we can transition these individual actions into collective actions that do feel powerful in a number of ways. But I don't think we can stop at awareness. I don't think we can stop at individual action. And another thing that kept happening with these exhibits is people from the exhibit locations would come up and say, wow, hey, this is great. Can we do this here? And I would have to say, no. Partially because a lot of these exhibits weren't even on the ocean. It's like, where are you going to get your debris? How are you going to make this happen for your community? But more because what this represents is an integration of science, art, education, and outreach. And optimally, in a given community, doing a project like this gives the community a voice. It gives them a way to say, hey, this is what we're concerned about. And it gives them a pathway forward to collective action, both through the work of creating the art and then through how you connect that art to steps we can move forward through. So, I worked for a few years moving the sculptures around, raising awareness, felt the limitations of that, and came to see you because I want to have a different answer for those cities and organizations who say, can we do this here? I want to be able to say, yes, here's a framework for bringing science, art, and education together. Here's a pathway forward, and you should do this in a way that makes sense for you in the context of your community. So that's what I'm working towards, and realized a few things within that. If you want community engagement, there's very few places where the whole community will go. It's not town hall meetings. It's not a number of things. But what it often is the schools. And if you create something with students that they can offer to the community, the whole community shows up. It's incredible. You get a more diverse gathering of folks than I see in most community gathering settings. So that was one of the motivations to say, okay, let's do this work in the schools. And create a framework that enables an outside group to partner with the school to create something to share with the community that can motivate action and put all those pieces together. So we've gone about that by developing this curriculum that helps the school to create a performance to share with the community. And this came about because I got here and met Beth, who's one of my co-advisors along with Max. And Beth said, I've got this awesome performance piece and got all these great resources online. And that's really cool. From my perspective, it's not quite at a point where a school could pick it up and run with it. Maybe I could help you do that. And at the same time, Jim Heckela from the CU Natural History Museum, who's right back there, awesome guy if you've never met Jim, really wanted to partner and expand the possibilities for his fossils in the classroom here. And so the three of us got together with that start and said, okay, let's work on this art-science integration thing in the context of schools with these two pieces. Let's put them together. Let's see where we go. And to give you a better idea of what Shine is about, I'm going to take a short step back and play a little overview video. This really highlights Beth's piece and work.
My name is Noelle, and I'm 11 years old. We made this timeline for the backdrop of the play. When we had present day, it kind of sent a lot of carbon in the air.
Long time coming, 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 long time coming.
But then we have the future, which is happy if we can make it happy.
Overturn and understand. Every time we understand. Fibers will combine to be the fabric of community. Shine is a musical performance for youth community engagement in resilience planning. It weaves together climate science and artistic expression into a funny and powerful story. Shine spans 300 million years of geological time to convey how humanity, energy, and climate are interrelated. This combination of music, movement, and story stirs feelings about the values that bind our communities together. Rehearsing each part of the musical immerses youth in a lexicon surrounding climate, energy, and resilience.
Energy can either be created or destroyed.
It leads participants in embodying different aspects of climate science and human development that led us to the point where we are now. The first half of the show is scripted, composed, and choreographed to convey the story that has already been told by history. The second half is open to be authored by local youth to generate solutions for their city's resilient future. Shine celebrates this experience and unites both the audience and the performers to strengthen their resolve to act on their ideas.
Shine, shine, shine.
So now we're turning that performance into a set of lessons that can be done in the classroom. In conjunction with this really cool Fossils in the Classroom kit that Jim and the museum designed. And this is an excellent addition because it gives kids another way to get hands-on with this discussion of the history that has led to our carbon predicament. When we first got together, Jim, Beth, and I wanted to make sure that we upheld the goals of the science lessons and upheld the goals of creating excellent art. And put in pieces there about communication and civic engagement. It's a lofty set of goals. But curriculum creation can take a lot of different forms. When I was working with Wash to Shore, I built a curriculum for them. And what that process was, with me at my desk going, okay, I've got this topic. What could a lesson be on the topic? Oh, I found good luck with these activities. Let's put them all together. Yay! Here you go! And we got some good lessons out of that process, but one person doing their best to work through it, to figure out what an entire lesson should cover, has limited potential to be the best educational tool possible. And instead, we really wanted to jump into a process of co-production, where instead of one or even all of us in a room going, all right, what should these lessons be? Let's make these for teachers. We wanted to bring the teachers into that group as well and say, well, what if instead of us making this for you, we made it with you? And we came up with some ideas and you came up with some ideas and we worked them through together. And then we kept meeting throughout this process to talk about how it's going, what needs to be changed, what needs to be added, and what it looks like in a classroom setting. So this co-production process was deeply rewarding for me. It's, I think, energizing and empowering for all involved to create together instead of putting it together on your own and just trying to figure it out. Some of this idea of co-production I actually first heard about in class with Lisa, looking at creating usable science. And in that model, you have the people who want that science, whether they're policymakers or citizens or whatever group that may be, who have a stake in that knowledge. And then you have a group of experts who can provide that knowledge. And then they're both working towards creating this piece of knowledge that actually does create policy or inspire action. It does something. So in the science realm, that's what that looks like. And those are all connected through that pathway of iterativity, meeting over and over and over again and not saying, I'm the scientist, here's your knowledge, bye, and calling it a day. And as I've gotten more into this realm, there's so many different names of this co-production thing, whether it's community-based participatory research, action research, co-production, creating usable science. But they all have quite a bit in common. They ask you to get the folks together that have a stake in the issue, provide a diverse group of experts to help advise and work through these things with that group, and work towards creating something meaningful from that process, while keeping in mind this iterative work of working this over and over and over and over again until you get it right. So, in our case, our stakeholders are the museum, inside the greenhouse, which Shine is nested under there, and the teachers, administrators, and students in Jefferson County. Getting together this group can be challenging depending on the project. For us, we had this incredible gift of Jim's past work. Because finding a willing group of stakeholders who's like, yeah, I'd like to do this with you, I'm in. That can be one of the toughest parts. But for us, Jim had worked with Jefferson County for years creating and distributing this Fossils in the Classroom kit. And so when he went back to him and said, hey, I've got a new curriculum project, would you give it a whirl? He said, yeah, come on in. And that was an incredible first step for us. Really grateful for that. So we kind of easily found this first group and then asked the administrators, hey, do you have some schools that might be interested? And they reached out to the schools and found Stilber Elementary, who was excited to try this new lesson set that we developed. And that became our stakeholders, those teachers and administrators combined with our two groups on campus here. Another huge advantage we had in this particular curriculum is that expert involvement has been taking place throughout the creation of both Shine and Fossils in the Classroom. They both had a lot of input from folks that are amazing scientists and artists and educators. So we are definitely going to keep engaging those experts as we move forward. But we didn't feel that the first thing we needed was to reach out there since so much expert involvement had already taken place. This intentional impact piece is something that we have been continually defining as well. What does this curriculum do? Why should a school teach this? Why should a community embrace their school teaching it? And for us, a huge part of it is creating community engagement with the students and giving the students an opportunity to be authors of knowledge, to be initiators of action, to take an active role, and through this art science curriculum piece, have that tool to reach out to their community and say, here's a starting point, here's what we need from you, let's move forward. So that's what we're going for. We still find a huge value in meeting very regularly and keeping everybody up to date on that team. In any of these co-production projects, if you get all this right, any one of these other things can derail you. You still need funding, resources, time, and flexibility, and a respect of the expertise of all involved. So we're really lucky that environmental studies and theater and dance, where Beth is based, and the CU Natural History Museum have enabled both of them to dedicate some time to this. And the Office of Outreach and Engagement, hi Lisa, has helped us with outreach and engagement grants to be able to move this forward with supplies, with curriculum writing, with stipends for those teachers. So we've been really lucky to have the funding we need. You need a hell of a lot of time to do this right. We're 2 years in, I think we'll probably be 2 years more. So that's something I think that causes a lot of these co-production projects to fall apart. You jump in and they're like, okay, what we'd like to do is community engagement. We want to get the community together to get their ideas on this art project and inform the artist, and the artist is going to create it, and we have 4 months. I'm like, oh, this has actually happened in the last couple of years. And the answer, if you're going to do that process, honestly, just has to be, nope, this isn't the process you're looking for. Choose a different method to get what you want to do done. This co-production stuff takes time. So 4 years for our project, more or less. And then throughout, we're really holding this balance of science and art as integral to our work. We piloted this last spring, the first version of the lessons. It was a 12-lesson set that took folks through the ancient history that sequestered that carbon all the way up through humans coming in and releasing that carbon, and then gave lessons for the kids to create solutions and present those to the community. That presentation happened on Earth Day. It was really cool to see an auditorium packed with community members. Not a certain type of community members. Everybody who's associated with the school showed up. So that was awesome. We're going to do another piloting this year, but some of the questions that came up for us that we wanted to keep in mind moving forward. So in this process of co-production, another thing you bump into is power differentials. And what we don't want to create is like, we are the people going in to give you this thing and you can create it with us, because that puts nothing at stake for us. It doesn't involve us in any type of risk. Whereas they're like, yeah, we'll try your new curriculum. And if that's not right for them, they've spent many, many days in the classroom for nothing. So they have a lot at risk. And we figured at least we should invite them to our space with the resources that we have here and provide that. But we're still sitting in this question, how do we ensure that we maintain something on the table, that we have something at risk, that we have something to give that will help that power differential balance out a little bit. And I think that the district is excited about the potential of these lessons, so that's one of those gifts. But this is still a question of how to ensure that we maintain that equity. Mm-hmm. This is the Earth Day performance. It was pretty great. That was my sound man. He preferred that role to being on stage. He did an excellent job. But in the way we went about it in the spring, we went through the lessons, we created the performance, and then we were done. And I think all of us stopped and went, wait, that wasn't the right way to end it. And so something we're going to adjust this year is at that performance, when the kids present their ideas about resiliency solution to that amazing crowd of the communities, we're going to ask that they also provide requests on how to actualize those ideas that they're presenting. So if a group says, we really want to focus on food waste, we would like to reduce that as part of a way to address climate change. And from our community, we need a food supplier who values cutting down on food waste. Or we need someone to help introduce systems that limit that issue in our school. And make that ask to those few hundred people in the crowd, because it's pretty likely someone has expertise in that community group. And then have that person put their name on the list for that group when they leave, so that the classroom can reach out to them and say, okay, help us do this, let's move forward. So that's a piece we're going to make sure we include this year to really keep that community engagement. And it doesn't have to be a thing. It can be policy. It can be a way of outreach. One of the groups we had this year, when we introduced a lot of the possibilities for solutions, really wanted to focus on educating women and girls as their way to address climate change. Like, that's amazing. How are we going to make that happen for you here in your community? And the answer could very well be, well, we need to find those community members who are interested in working with you on that issue so that you can reach the people and places where that help could be given. So I think there's a number of pathways to enable this to be an active realm of engagement and moving policies and actions forward through that science-art integration. Another thing that we found this year that we should have known, but it turns out when you are with a group of 4th and 5th graders and you say, hey, I'd like you to come up with some solutions to make your community stronger, to look at this big issue you've been introduced to. They kind of go, pick up trash? And it's like, yeah, okay, let's do that, but let's also look at these. So integrating Project Drawdown is another switch we're going to do this year to ground those actions. We did this last year in May after the performance to help the kids focus on these solutions, but they weren't as integrated into the performance as we'd have liked. So this year we're focused on the top 10 or 15 and ask kids, okay, we want you to base this work in your community. We want you to have an ask for the audience, but we also want to ground your focus in some of the top solutions for climate change. So it gives them enough freedom to work in a lot of different realms. And there's some easy targets here, which is excellent too. That food waste target, that's something that every school everywhere can work on and do better on. So there are definite pathways within this list. There's some harder ones, and it's always fun when you get the 5th grader who's like, I'd like to focus on silvopasture. And you're like, cool, let's support you in doing that and engaging your community there. Those are some of our lessons learned. We'll be piloting this year in the spring. We're redesigning our lessons with some of the education team at CU now and with our teachers from last year who will help lead the workshops this year. And last thing, in the spirit of engaging and taking action rather than just talking, on this list, right here in this room, I want to focus on one of these top solutions, and let's go with food waste, because it's a great one that we can have agency in, and we're probably not going to work on refrigerant management and wind turbines as a group right here, right now. But I want to take an opportunity to give you this action challenge and say, you've been listening to this conversation about how to move forward with climate change, how to move beyond awareness, and I've talked about collective action. And let's focus on food waste. And I'll send up a follow-up email to everybody on the list there so we can create a collective challenge here. I'd like you to create one meal this week that does not create food waste. One way to do that would to follow a recipe and a plan instead of just like, bag of this, bag of that, bag of this, go! So Beth has designed these amazing cards. I'm going to let you talk just a second about that, Beth.
So these are created by our Young Women's Voices for Climate group under Inside the Greenhouse. And this is youth who really found that they got excited about food because the whole country is excited about food. We like shows, we like everything. And it helped sustain our community. So they started our last retreat that we did in the spring. They did the whole retreat around making mostly plant-rich diet recipe cards. And so they did the art, we made the meals, we ate the meals together, and they really find that this idea of like, if you are what you eat, you can be the solution. And using recipes also really has an impact with reducing food waste, because if you plan ahead, you're like less likely to waste. So please take one of these, and they'll also be at the city launch meeting on Thursday night at 5:30 on East Campus.
So yeah, I want to actually move us to that. Let's take this action challenge. This will be our mini community in 1 week. Please try and create a meal without food waste that is as sustainable as possible. I'll send you the Google Drive link. I'm going to ask that you send a picture of what you create and recipes and any notes about sustainability or cooking or anything else you want to include. But I'll send this email out as a follow-up, and that means if you're not signed up, better put your email on that list before you roll out. But taking that as a collective action challenge, I think will be a fun way to follow up on this work. And if you want to learn more, there's a lot of readings to do by some folks in the room and some folks not. You can look at the Fossils in the Classroom kit online or the Inside the Greenhouse website, which has a lot on Shine. There's also that I just learned about this week, this huge conference in Denver, the Biennial of the Americas going on right now, and their focus is empathy to action. And they're having a lot of conversations with thinkers and artists and activists from North, South, and Central America on how to create that sense of action through empathy, which I think connects directly to art-science integration. All right. With that, thank you for your time and taking questions. Oh yeah. So, on October 23rd, if you would like to know more, engaging climate change through the arts, I will be on a panel at the library with an amazing group of folks that can help us work through the nuances of this art, science, climate change issue.
Patrick?
Yeah.
Awesome talk, but of course the little academic in me is like, define what you mean by food waste, because I'm like, how do I do this challenge? And I'm like thinking, do you mean don't throw out, like eat everything you make, or do you mean create a meal that doesn't throw away any packaging, or like what is the envelope of how you create a low waste food meal?
I appreciate your question. I'm going to give a couple of responses. First, rather than have me define it, check out drawdown.org and their food waste solution and delve into a little bit about what they mean as far as not creating food waste, rather than having me be like, off the cuff. But also, don't overthink it too much. This is just meant to be a fun action challenge to follow up on keeping in mind taking action and moving forward from awareness. So consider what sustainability means to you. Create a meal that embraces that and creates as little waste as possible, depending on what that means to you. Throw up a picture, a recipe, and include those notes, because I want to hear about what this meal is to you. So, I look forward to it. Yes?
I saw on your list, family planning.
Oh, yeah.
And that is an issue that I think has just disappeared from our discussion. And I think it's central to this problem of overpopulation. So how do you approach that? And is it politically sensitive in your community where you go?
We've had no objection so far from presenting this list. And we do run it past the schools, and they are okay with these lessons, and they're aware that it's on there. We are going to work on a few lessons that outline what these mean for students so that they can make an informed choice. And family planning, I think we're going to put in terms of the higher the population, the greater the environmental impact.
Yes, right.
But it opens a place for students and teachers to have a bigger conversation about that if they choose. So I think that many of these, like, these are just not being talked about. We're talking about electric cars. We're talking about carbon sequestration. We're talking about so many solutions that don't fall in this range, that just having these out there and talking through each one of them. Well, why poly-rich diet? Talking that through with 4th and 5th graders, not being like, you should only do that, but like, let's be honest. Meat takes up a lot of resources to make. Or talking about educating women and girls, family planning, food waste, refrigerant management. Like, these are not topics that are discussed commonly in the context of climate change. So I think there's a lot of power in this list, and we will outline each one and let the school move forward how they would best like to on those topics.
Okay, good.
Dave.
So this question's both personal and kind of also a question about the curriculum and more or curriculum and just kind of your experiences in this space. I'm wondering how you deal with cynicism around climate, collective action, and acting on climate change. I mean, it's hard, or part of that is, I mean, cynicism is a kind of, can be a really helpful tool for people that don't want action, that making the population cynical about, or making someone cynical about, oh, I can't do anything about it, what's the point, our system's broken, what have you, right? That can be a really effective tool to kind of promote inaction. And I feel within my own life of like, I have to fight my own cynicism about things on a regular basis. And I'm wondering how you deal with it personally. How do you deal with it personally? Two, in the curriculum or when you're working with students, kind of how do you address, confront, talk through, maybe navigate around, say, more cynical points of view or just cynicism in those spaces as well?
Sure. Yeah. So one thing on the curriculum, another part that we're going to integrate that I didn't touch on, but I'm glad you mentioned it because it should be something in this presentation to include on what we're creating, is this working through climate grief in the classroom. And that's, I think, something that's often overlooked when we talk about climate change, especially with students. We either paint one side or the other. We say this is the science, things are really bad, or we say, let's get together and move forward, yay! And don't often acknowledge that space in between of, you're feeling a lot right now. Let's honor that. Let's talk through it. Let's work through some activities in which you're free to express that. Because I take cynicism to be part of that place when you get to an area where you feel that you can't do anything. Whether it's because of the inadequacy of the system, of the size of the issue, whatever space is causing that, I feel like cynicism is a lack of hope. And acknowledging that, I think, is tied pretty closely with grief. So acknowledging where students are at in that spectrum and letting them give voice to those very real and very important emotions, I think, is a first step. The great thing about this art form, this embodied theatrical-based art that we're creating, is it inherently involves action. And there's something about, you can be in that place of grief, and we're going to be honest about expressing it. We're going to work through it as a group. But then you get up, you move, you create things through that movement as a group. And I think that physical movement helps move past that stuck place of cynicism and grief. And it's almost unintentional. I was doing a workshop in Florida with a group of science teachers, and I made them get up and go, la, 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 la. And one of them said, what are we doing? Why? And I said, well, do you feel different now? I said, yeah. Do you feel more ready to communicate and engage? He went, yeah. Well, that's what we're doing. So I think the curriculum lends itself to that. Personally, it really is this perspective that the arts, I think, has contributed in that we can create the most incredible things. We can bring them to life. We can bring things out that have never existed before and recreate the world. And for me, I just have this confidence we can do it. And I see the level of engagement people are ready for and know that we're on the cusp of moving forward. Call it unfounded optimism. But for me, it really has been an honest situating in the power the arts have to show us the impact of creation and reimagining and defining a new world.
Thank you.
I know we're at time. Yeah.
So if I could just jump up and say, thank you so much, Patrick. You all have the challenge before you. I also want to say again, thank you so much to Carol. Really carrying on the legacy of RAD. who has meant a lot to many of us who are here in this room today. Thanks everybody for coming along. We don't have a talk next week, but we have Colorado State Senator Ray Scott who will be visiting and talking about his views on climate and environment. So thank you so much, and let's give a round of applause. Okay, hope to see you all again soon.
What are you doing?